Hey, my name is Will Johnson. I'm a developer advocate at Auth0, and this is Auth Answered, where we answer some of your most frequent auth questions. Today's episode is all about JWTs. So we got some few questions lined up, so let's get started. All right, so we got, why is a JWT called a jot or pronounced as jot? The simple answer is that's what the creators of the standard wanted the JWT to be pronounced. It's actually kind of easier to say jot instead of JWT. So that's the reason why JWT is pronounced jot. The more you know. All right, so let's go to the next question. All right, so are JWTs encrypted? That's a great question. So JWTs are not encrypted. Anyone can see the contents of a JWT. And so that's why it's important not to store any sensitive information inside of a JWT. And so while JWTs technically can be encrypted at Auth0, we use signed JWTs for our tokens. All right, next question. All right, so what is a JWT? So JWT stands for JSON Web Token. It's an open standard that defines a compact and self-contained way for securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. The information can be verified and trusted because it is digitally signed. JWTs can be signed using a secret or using a public-private key pair. These verify the integrity or that the information inside the JWT has not been changed. All right, next question. All right, so the next one is, what is an audience when it comes to a JWT? So the audience value, or the AUD claim within a JWT, is for who is the receiver of the JWT. It is usually a string or an array of strings that identifies the receiver or consumer of the JWT. It can be one application, it could be multiple applications, it could be an API. The audience claim is used to try to mitigate JWT abuse and give you some information on how the JWT is used. The AUD or audience claim is a mandatory claim for your JWTs, and the value of the audience claim must be registered on the authorization server. Then the authorization server will use that value to verify the validity of the JWT. All right, next question, how do you decode a JWT? So in order to decode a JWT, you can go to jwt.io. And remember what I said earlier, the JWTs that we use for Auth0 are not encrypted, they are encoded. And so you can decode them to see what's available inside of them. There's also other open source libraries you can use and online JWT decoders like JWT.io. So you can put in the JWT information and decode it and see what's included inside of the JWT. All right, next question. So next question, what are claims when it comes to a JWT? Claims are usually included in the second part of a JWT called the payload. And the claims basically tell you information about an entity, typically the user. There are three types of claim: registered, public, and private. Registered claims are predefined claims like the issuer, the audience, and things like that. Public claims are ones that can be defined by the user of the JWT. And to make sure there's no naming collisions, we usually recommend that you use namespace claims when you are creating these claims. And private claims are claims used to share information between parties that agree on them, are usually not registered or public. All right, so that's what claims are. Let's move on to the next question. I don't have anything creative. All right, where are JWTs stored? And as any developer would know, the answer is, it depends. So if you're using a traditional web app that has a server and you're not making API calls, then you wouldn't need to store the token anywhere. If you are making API calls on behalf of the user, then you need an access token and optionally a refresh token. These can be stored on the server side or in the session cookie. And if you're using a single page application, we recommend that you use one of the Auth0 SDKs to handle the token storage and management for you. But the approach that we recommend is that you use memory inside of the browser while utilizing web workers, because web workers run in a separate global scope than the rest of the application. Just a quick note that using the in-browser storage method does not persist through tabs and page refreshes. All right, so next question. When should you use JWTs? A couple scenarios where you can use JWTs is with authorization. This is the most common scenario that people use JWTs. Once a user is logged in and the JWT is issued to the user, each subsequent request will include a JWT, allowing the user to access routes, services, and resources that were given permission to that token. Single sign-on is a feature that is widely used today because it can be used across different domains. And single sign-on with something like OpenID Connect uses JWTs nowadays. Another way you can use JWTs is for information exchange. Because you can validate the JWTs, make sure that they're valid, you can be sure that the information passed is valid as well. And this is something you can use to, change someone's profile page or something like that with something like an ID token. But just to be clear, usually they're not used for authentication. They're usually used for authorization, which is granting access to resources or saying what resources they can get access to, and then exchanging information from the JWT to an application to customize a user profile page, as an example. All right, next question. All right, so the next question is, what are roles? That's a whole different topic, but specifically in JWTs, roles are the roles that a user has in the application. For example, if they're an administrator or user or, overlord, like whatever role that the user has and is used, and usually those roles are set as part of a custom claim. Since they're not part of the standard JWT format, you would add them as a custom claim, and then they will be part of the user metadata like the ID token or the access token. So while roles are not directly related to JWTs, it is something that you can set with a JWT, and people get those confused a lot, so I thought I'd help clear that up. All right, next question. All right, so how is a JWT validated? So remember that Auth0 uses signed JWT. So that JWT gets signed with the signing algorithm. And then in order to validate that information, generally the current hash value and the original hash value are parsed, are decoded, and then compared to verify that the signature is authentic. If you're not using one of the Auth0 SDKs to handle the parsing and validation for you, we highly recommend that you use middleware or one of the third-party libraries in order to do the JWT parsing and validation. And on JWT.O, you will find libraries for Swift, Python, PHP, and various frameworks and languages for you to be able to do that securely. All right, last question. How is a JWT created? A JWT is created when you take three parts. It's the header, the payload, and the signature. That make up the whole of the JWT. And typically a JWT follows the format of having the encoded header, a dot, the encoded payload, a dot, and then the signature. The header usually has two parts, the signing algorithm and the type of token that it is. So it would be a JWT in our case. And then it is encoded using base64 encoding. And the second part is the payload, which includes the information about the entity or the user, which are called claims. And then the payload is also base64 encoded. And then the third part is the signature. The signature takes the encoded header, the encoded payload, a secret, and then the algorithm that was specified back in the header, and then that gets signed. Okay, the output of all three parts and then the signature and the signing is a 3 base64 encoded strings separated by dots that can easily be passed into an HTML or HTTP environments. all while being more compact than XML-based standards like SAML. All right, so that is all of the questions for JWTs in this edition of Auth Answered. If you have any other topics that you would like to be covered, leave a comment below, and I will see you next time.